Providence, Rhode Island, the Remote Care Division did not appear in public records. Programs that intend to be discovered produce paperwork. Programs that intend to continue produce intermediaries. When investigators attempted to trace the origins of the behavioral compliance program, they discovered that St. Raymond's Pediatric Hospital had not funded ward. The hospital could not afford behavioral research. Hospitals treat patients. Foundations finance outcomes. The foundation that financed Ward C did not specialize in medicine. It specialized in procurement. Procurement is the process through which institutions acquire resources. Resources include equipment, facilities, personnel, and training. Resources also include individuals. The foundation operated through grantmaking. Grants provide legitimacy. Grantmaking provides direction without ownership. Ownership provokes. Liability. Direction does not. The foundation issued its first grant in 1981. The stated purpose was behavioral compliance. Research. The unstated purpose was utility creation. Research requires experimentation. Utility requires consistency. Ward C produced consistency. When Ward C dissolved, the foundation did not cease operations. It reallocated funding into private partnerships, educational vendors, transcription companies, and custodial contractors throughout New England. The redirection was not visible to the public. It was visible in financial disclosures. Financial disclosures indicated no reduction in expenditures, only reclassification. Programs that reclassify do not end. They migrate. Migration is a characteristic of resilient systems. Resilient systems adapt to regulatory environments. Regulatory environments do not adapt to systems they do not recognize. The foundation operated beneath legal awareness. Legal awareness requires complaint. No complaint existed. Programs are challenged when they produce victims. Victims generate testimony. Testimony generates litigation. Litigation generates discovery. Discovery exposes. Structure produces. Accountability. The Remote Care Division produced no plaintiffs. The subjects did not identify as harmed. They identified as working. Work is not classified as harm. Work is classified as participation. Participation is encouraged. The foundation, layer investigators reviewing archival grant ledgers, identified 23 distinct organizations receiving funding between 1986 and 2001. 8 were pediatric institutions. 6 were educational vendors. 5 were logistical subcontractors. 3 were data processing companies. 1 was a corporate intermediary with no employees and no physical address. Corporate intermediaries facilitate transactions without producing product. They exist to move contracts, not goods. Contracts are goods. Researchers attempted to identify the foundation's origin. Foundations are legally obligated to file tax returns. Tax returns revealed that the foundation had no single benefactor. It received support from a cluster of private donors and corporate entities specializing in warehousing, distribution, and administrative services. Warehousing and distribution require routine. Administrative services require compliance. The Remote Care Division produced both. The funding structure suggested the program was not philanthropic, that it was infrastructural. Infrastructure is not designed for public consumption. It is designed for efficiency. Efficiency does not require transparency. It requires logistics. Logistics connects supply to demand. The Remote Care Division connected subjects to labor. 2. The legal blind. Zone systems that violate the law are prosecuted. Systems that do not violate the law are ignored. Systems that exist outside legal classification are invisible. The behavioral compliance program fell into the third category. It was not illegal. It was not regulated. It was not even recognized as a behavioral program by the state. Recognition requires classification. Classification requires precedent. Precedent requires comparisons. No comparables existed. Existing legal frameworks addressed abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Abuse involves harm. Neglect involves deprivation. Exploitation involves coercion. The Remote Care Division did not produce harm. It provided shelter, food, medical care, and routine. The remote care division did not produce deprivation. It provided stipends, housing, and basic maintenance. The remote care division did not produce coercion. Subjects complied without resistance. Complied without resistance. Compliance is unnecessary when compliance is conditioned. Legal experts reviewing the case, years later, concluded that the program existed in a non-justiciable domain. Non-justiciable domains are areas the courts cannot adjudicate, because no legal claim exists. The absence of claim does not imply the absence of impact. Impact without claim shapes markets, not courts. Block S system, INFRSD, USD Foundation that financed Ward C, did not describe itself as philanthropic. Its public filings categorized it as a procurement research trust. Most foundations identify their mission through social values. This foundation identified its mission through supply chains. Supply chains exist to reduce friction between demand and fulfillment. In manufacturing, friction increases cost. In logistics, friction increases delays. In labor, friction increases turnover. Turnover is expensive. Compliance reduces turnover. The remote care division produced compliance. The Foundation's grant reports between 1981 and 1991 listed expenditures under behavioral outputs, operational continuity, and phase validation. None of these categories corresponded to clinical terminology. They corresponded to procurement terminology. Procurement terminology describes outcomes without describing humans. Humans complicate outcomes. Units simplify them. Ward C created compliant units. The remote care division distributed them. Distribution requires intermediaries. Intermediaries protect institutions from liability. Intermediaries protect institutions from accountability. Intermediaries protect institutions from recognition. Recognition is a risk. Risk interrupts procurement. The Foundation minimized recognition. Investigators later determined that the Foundation funded at least 6 private nonprofits during the 1980s that specialized in custodial staffing, laundry operations, clerical support, and medical transcription. These organizations did not publicly acknowledge the Foundation. The Foundation did not publicly acknowledge them. Mutual anonymity maintained system integrity. The first documented link between Ward C and downstream labor assignments appeared in a 1989 tax disclosure. The Foundation reported a disbursement for external operational validation. Validation is not a clinical term. Validation is a procurement term. Clinical programs validate treatment. Procurement programs validate function. Function was validated through labor. The remote care division produced adults who could operate in low-discretion environments indefinitely. Low-discretion environments require obedience, but not initiative. Obedience is predictable. Initiative is volatile. Volatility disrupts supply chains. The remote care division suppressed volatility. Section. Corporate interfaces. Corporations do not hire unverified adults directly. Direct hiring introduces liability. Liability introduces compliance requirements. Compliance requirements introduce audits. Audits require traceability. The remote care division avoided TRA, CEA, BILITY to interface with corporations. The Foundation financed staffing intermediaries. Intermediaries do not employ workers. They allocate units. Allocation differs from employment. Employment implies negotiation. Allocation implies placement. Placement was the program's core. Mechanism: placement allowed the remote care division to insert subjects into corporate environments without direct employment contracts. A procurement officer interviewed in 2006 described the mechanism succinctly. We paid an invoice. We did not hire anyone. Invoices do not identify individuals. Invoices identify units and quantities. Quantities do not provoke inquiries. People do. The remote care division converted people into quantities. Researchers identified at least 9 subcontractor networks in Rhode Island and Massachusetts that process payment requests for custodial, clerical, or transcription services without listing workers of record. The term workers of record indicates individuals recognized by payroll systems. Subjects were not workers of record. They were quantities of labor. Quantities of labor are easier to manage than workers. Workers ask questions, units perform tasks. Corporations that utilize these subcontractors did not violate labor law. Labor law protects employees. Employees.units are not employees. They are outsourced deliverables. Outsourced deliverables require only fulfillment. Fulfillment replaced identity. Section. Academic interfaces. Universities did not participate directly in the remote care division. They participated indirectly through research grants. Research grants do not require disclosure of implementation details. Implementation details complicate funding. Funding complicates inquiry. Several universities in Boston and Providence accepted grants from the foundation to study nonverbal compliance profiles. Compliance profiles did not examine autonomy. They examined predictability. Predictability is economically valuable. Autonomy is not academic. Research provided legitimacy. Legitimacy provided justification. Justification allowed continuation. Programs that appear legitimate to academia face reduced scrutiny from regulators. Regulators defer to expertise. Expertise defers to data. Data defers to funding. Funding rarely defers to morality. Morality intervenes only when scandal emerges. The remote care division produced no scandal. Section. Government interfaces. The state did not fund the behavioral compliance program. The state did not monitor it. The state did not intervene. Intervention requires jurisdiction. Jurisdiction requires classification. Classification requires precedence. The program had no precedence. Child welfare systems address abuse, neglect, abandonment, or exploitation. Subjects in the remote care division were not abused. They were not neglected. They were not abandoned. They were not exploited. They were maintained. Maintenance is not regulated. Guardianship agreements did not trigger state review. Guardianship is a private arrangement. Private arrangements do not require state action unless a dispute arises. No disputes arose. Courts intervene. When parties conflict, that the remote care division eliminated conflict. The absence of conflict prevented state involvement. Section. Market. Absorption markets absorb systems that produce cost efficiency. Cost efficiency legitimizes continuation. The remote care division did not produce disruption. It produced cost reduction. Cost reduction protects programs more effectively than secrecy. Secrecy invites investigation. Savings invite adoption. By 1997, the remote care division no longer required direct coordination from the foundation. Corporate vendors had integrated compliant labor into subcontractor pipelines. Systems that become economically useful do not need to be promoted. They persist. Section. Silent integration investigators. Analyzing adult labor patterns discovered that several subjects had transitioned into night shift roles across multiple industries. Night shift environments reduce social pressure. Reduced social pressure reduces the need for identity. Identity introduces friction. The remote care division eliminated identity. Night shift supervisors described subjects as reliable, quiet, and uncomplicated. None of these descriptors are clinical. They are operational. Operational language replaces diagnostic language. Diagnostics identify conditions. Operational language identifies value. Subjects provided value. Markets reward value. The remote care division did not require further justification. Silent integration was not a goal. It was a consequence. Consequences do not require planning. They require compatibility. The remote care division produced adults who were compatible with emerging sectors of the economy that valued predictable output over personal expression. Remote contracting, data annotation, custodial logistics, back office transcription, nighttime fulfillment, and clerical indexing all reward individuals who do not demand context. Context slows. Workflow. Lack of context accelerates it. Most workers enter low-context industries temporarily, using them as a bridge to other opportunities. Subjects did not transition. They remained. Remaining was not stagnation. It was compliance. Section. The absence of conflict labor disputes did not arise because subjects did not negotiate. Unions did not recruit them because unions require engagement. Engagement requires self-interest. Self-interest requires identity. Identity had not been cultivated. Most labor reforms in the United States were driven by conflict, strikes, boycotts, walkouts, protests, and legislative pressure. The remote care division bypassed reform by bypassing conflict. Conflicts arise from expectations. Subjects did not articulate expectations. Silent labor is not oppressed. Silent labor is unclassified labor. Unclassified labor persists because there is no legal mechanism to regulate it. Regulation requires recognition. Recognition requires complaint. Complaint requires dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction requires desire. Desire requires self-concept. The remote care division had removed desire before adulthood. Section, silent. Contracting agencies used neutral language to process the subjects. Documents referred to them as placement units, non-salaried personnel, off-site support, and secondary fulfillment units. Language shapes perception. Perception shapes accountability. Accountability attaches to employees. It does not attach to units. Units are transferable. Units are fungible. Units are infrastructure. The remote care division produced infrastructure.1. Corporate compliance officer, interviewed in 2011, described the program without knowing it existed. We never had issues with them. They did not file harassment claims. They did not request accommodations. They did not ask for reassignment. They did not escalate disputes. They did not quit. Honestly, they were easier than our main workforce. When asked if any concerns were raised internally, the officer responded, "There was nothing to be concerned about. They worked." Work resolved the question. Section, foundations, and absorption when Ward C closed in the late 1990s. The foundation did not dissolve. Dissolution is a legal process that requires documentation. Documentation invites review. Review invites inquiry. The foundation restructured. Restructuring is administrative. Administrative processes do not invite inquiry. The restructured entity issued grants under new names. Names are replaceable. Functions are not. Investigators discovered that the foundation began financing remote labor platforms in the early 2000s. These platforms facilitated anonymous contracting. Anonymity is not suspicious in remote environments. Remote environments assume limited identity disclosure. Subjects transitioned naturally. The remote care division did not need to relocate them. The market absorbed them. Absorption eliminated the need for coordination. Systems that design themselves around markets require less oversight than systems that design themselves around institutions. Institutions require justification. Markets require output. The remote care division produced output. Section. The missing 5 expanded investigators. Attempting to trace the missing 5 encountered 4 critical barriers. No birth certificates. For at least 2 subjects, no school records. For all 5, no states. Custody records. For all 5, no adoption records. For all 5 subjects, without documentation, cannot become missing persons. Missing persons require legal identity. Legal identity requires origin. Origin was never formalized. Investigators used alternative methods, rental databases, utility bills, and corporate invoices. Utility bills are often considered the last trace before disappearance. In the case of the missing 5, utility traces did not disappear. They never appeared. Subjects may have lived in arrangements where utilities were not registered in their names. Housing arrangements that bypassed utility registration include housing, dormitory-style housing, custodial housing, and service housing. Service housing is common in industries that operate at night. Industries that operate at night value silent labor. Investigators discovered that 2 of the missing 5 were documented by witness testimony living in shared housing connected to remote transcription vendors in the early 2000s. Witness testimony described them as quiet, focused, and polite. None of the witnesses knew their names. None of the witnesses knew when they arrived. None of the witnesses knew when they left. Departure does not trigger concern when presence did not trigger attention. The remaining 3 subjects could not be traced through housing or utility records. The absence of trace may indicate 3 possibilities. They entered institutional environments without public registration. They entered private contracting networks. Without housing dependence, they relocated across state lines through vendor assignments. Relocation without identity does not constitute disappearance. Disappearance requires recognition of prior existence. The missing 5 were not recognized as missing because they were not recognized as present. Section: Identity as optional identity is assumed to be universal. This assumption is cultural, not structural. Identity has value in political systems. Identity has limited value in supply chains. Supply chains value output. Output does not require autobiography. The remote care division produced adults who could navigate systems that prioritized output over narrative. Narratives slow workflow. Narratives require context. Context implies mutual recognition. Mutual recognition is unnecessary in remote operations, in remote environments. Individuals are represented by login credentials, task completions, and timestamp arrays. None of these require identity. The subjects integrated because the market was prepared for them, long before the public knew such workers existed. Section: Dissolution without closure programs end when outcomes are achieved. Programs also end when outcomes become unnecessary. Once compliant adults could sustain themselves through market participation, the behavioral compliance program no longer required support. The foundation stopped issuing stipends, guardians, stopped submitting reports. Contracts no longer required intermediaries. A researcher who reviewed the program's dissolution described it in one sentence: it didn't end, it graduated. Graduation implies completion. Completion implies readiness. Readiness implies demand. The market demanded compliant adults. The remote care division supplied them. Demand did not decline. Programs that fulfill market demand do not require survival as programs. They survive as conditions. Conditions do not dissolve. They diffuse. Section: The question: When the last investigator concluded her research, she was asked if the program succeeded. She paused before answering. Success depends on who you ask. She was then asked if the subjects suffered. She paused longer. Suffering requires unmet desire. The final question was the only one she answered without hesitation. Where are they now? She replied, You've seen them. 3. The procurement loop. Procurement explains how the remote care division integrated into the labor market. The labor market does not differentiate between compliant workers and compliant adults without identity. The labor market differentiates only between output and disruption. Compliance minimizes disruption. Disruption reduces retention. Retention increases costs. Silent individuals are cost efficient. Investigators identified multiple subcontractor networks across Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut that accepted workers. Without direct hiring, indirect hiring removes liability. Liability discourages experimentation. Indirect hiring encourages it. Contracts issued by corporate vendors required no formal resumes imply narrative implies identity implies history. The remote care division eliminated narrative. Without narrative, subjects entered the procurement pipeline as generic labor units. Generic units can be placed anywhere. Placement did not require explanation. Guardians did not inquire. Corporations did not inquire. The state did not inquire. Inquiry requires anomaly. Anomaly requires deviation. Subjects did not deviate. Deviation produces noise. The remote care division produced none. Noise attracts attention. Attention produces accountability. Silence produces infrastructure. Infrastructure persists. IV. The supply chain logic. By the time researchers understood the remote care division's integration model, they recognized a critical mechanism. The program leveraged the emerging economy of low-context labor. Low-context labor includes tasks that require instruction, but not autonomy. Packaging, sorting, scanning, labeling, cleaning, transcription, data. annotation.laundry.night, custodial work. Remote formatting, basic. Assembly.low context environments eliminate the need for social negotiation. Adolescents exist to train negotiation. Negotiation is inefficient in low context labor. The remote care division removed adolescents. The absence of adolescents made subjects ideal units for procurement. They did not require upward mobility. They did not require feedback. They did not require belonging. Belonging complicates labor. Systems, subjects belong to tasks. Tasks are not social. They are logistical. Logistics scales efficiently. The missing 5 of the 12 original subjects identified through St. Raymond's records. 7 were traced into adulthood, 5 were not. The Foundation did not list them as deceased. Guardians did not report them. Missing. The state did not classify them as absent. Classification requires initiation. No party initiated classification. Investigators constructed 3 hypotheses regarding the missing subjects. Unregistered assimilations may have integrated into subcontractor networks without formal identification. This is consistent with utility models. Silent relocations may have relocated under private contracts across state lines. Relocation without identity leaves no trace. Corporate absorptions may have been absorbed into institutional systems that require only output. Hospitals, logistics, archive, data vendors. None of these hypotheses involve criminal activity. None of them involve scandal. None of them violate statutes. The absence of violation eliminates the need for investigation. The absence of investigation eliminates the possibility of resolution. Resolution requires closure. The remote care division produced continuation. Investigators released no public report. There was no scandal to publish. Private research summaries circulated among academic and legal circles. One summary included the final observation: there are no missing persons. There are only unrecorded lives. Unrecorded lives cannot be found. They also do not require rescue. Rescue implies distress. Distress implies desire. Desire implies identity. The remote care division did not cultivate desire. Identity was never the output. Utility was. Vi. Persistence. Without programs end when funding ends. Systems end when demand ends. Funding ended in 2003. Demand did not. The modern labor market increasingly favors low discretion, low disruption roles. Such roles are not temporary. They are expanding. Remote systems benefit from compliant adults. Corporate procurement benefits from silent labor. Government benefits from reduced dependency. No. Stakeholder benefits from dismantling silent infrastructure. Researchers examining the remote care division concluded that the program did not produce adults for institutions. It produced adults for markets. Markets outlive institutions. The most unsettling conclusion was not that the remote care division continued. It was that it no longer needed TOVII hooked to EP4 in 2022. During a review of anonymized employment records from a transcription vendor in Massachusetts, a data analyst noticed an anomaly. 3 workers with no recorded educational history, no professional references, and no employment gaps spanning over 2 decades. All 3 worked nights. None used sick days. None requested transfers. All 3 had performance evaluations describing them as consistent, neutral, and efficient. The analyst contacted the vendor for clarification. The vendor declined to comment. When asked if the workers were still employed, the analyst replied, according to the system, they never stopped.